You're listening to the Modern Healthcare Back Office, a podcast dedicated to solving the billing issues and gridlock facing the healthcare industry, presented by Prochant, hosted by Chuck Ellis and Rachel Schools.
Well, hey there, folks. Chuck here, and welcome to another edition of the Modern Healthcare Back Office. I am joined, as always, by my wonderful co-host, Ms. Rachel Schools. How are you, Rachel?
I'm amazing, Chuck. How are you?
I am also amazing. I am amazing because we are joined today by our special guest, our own fearless leader, Mr. Joey Graham, Chief Revenue Officer at Prochant. How are you today, Joey?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. We are so excited to have you. We are talking today about HME News Business Summit 2022. It happened in Nashville, and there was a lot of stuff covered there. I wanted to talk to you while it was still fresh in your mind and get your thoughts on it. And for those who don't know, tell us a little bit about what the HME News Summit, for those of us who don't know, or for those who are listening who don't know, tell us a little bit about what the HME News Business Summit is.
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite conferences that happens every year. It's different than the other conferences that are in the HME industry. So, the major conferences in the HME industry would be MedTrade, right? Everybody knows about MedTrade. It used to be twice a year. It still is, I guess, officially as of this year. But starting next year, MedTrade's going down to once per year. And that's going to be, I believe, in April. And it's moved to Dallas, Texas for the first time. The other major conferences would be like VGM has a Heartland conference every year. It's every summer, I think in like June. And it's a great conference as well, especially for networking. A lot of sessions. Same thing with MedTrade, a lot of sessions, a lot of simultaneous tracks where you've got, let's say 10 to 15 educational tracks with simultaneous sessions going, right? So you can bring your billers, you can bring the whole team. Everybody's got something, right? Your inventory people can go walk the floor, talk to the vendor. Your reimbursement people can take classes and learn about the latest reimbursement knowledge. And there's always executive tracks, things as well for the leadership. So those are like the big ones, right? And of course, there are state associations as well, where again, you'll have some education, maybe not always concurrent tracks. HME News Business Summit is different from all that. HME News Business Summit happens once a year, and it's where all the decision makers come together. It's been happening for years and years now. The attendees at this summit, and it's not an inexpensive conference to go to. There's a hefty price tag. It's in a really nice hotel, and it's all the decision makers. So the people who are attending are the owner, the presidents, CEOs, COOs, the top people at some of the larger providers, as well as vendors. And it gives us a chance. There's no exhibit hall. So it's not like that where it's all about the vendors sponsoring everything and then having exhibit hall things and trying to get people over to your booth. No, instead, it's all about bringing all these decision makers together and then putting them on one track, one educational track that's relevant to the HME executive, and then giving a lot of opportunities for networking and stuff. So it was awesome. It was a really good conference this year. HME News Business Summit has been virtual the last 2 years. I think 2019 was the last time it was in person. And then, of course, 2020 COVID hit. It was virtual. 2021, we had the second waves coming through and Delta and all that. And so it went virtual again. So now 22, we're back in person. I think that drove up attendance. Everybody just wanted to see who would be there and who showed up. And it was almost 200 people that came.
Yeah, I was curious what that was like, Joey. Like how many people were there compared to pre-COVID volume?
It was. Let's say I talked to the organizers, and obviously the industry's been going through consolidation for a period of time now. And every one of the conferences has seen attendance drop as a function of the number of providers, right? The number of providers over the last decade is down by almost 30%, I believe. Almost 30% of the providers who used to be in business 10 years ago are no longer in business. And most of that was driven by competitive bidding, right? That was kind of the stated goal of competitive bidding, is that there's too many providers, there's a lot of fraud, we need to thin the herd of it. And it's worked for all intent and purposes, right? So I think if you go back, there were more people, but this was really well attended. Everybody felt really good about the numbers. I think it was pretty much on par with the 2019 event. And it was a really good experience. Yeah, it was in Nashville, downtown Nashville, the West End, really beautiful exhibit hall and everything.
I know what you mean about attending and having things come back live. I was just at NASP with our colleague John Love, which is a specialty pharmacy conference, and It was fascinating, the energy there. As it was the first conference I had been to in a couple of years because of COVID and because people just kind of stopped doing them. So that energy and that vibe of being able to network with people, it certainly felt like people had missed that, and there were lots of lively conversations happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is short too. Everybody came in on Sunday, the 18th of September. Monday, we had sessions all day. And then Tuesday was just half day. So most people left Tuesday afternoon, including me, had to head to another conference. But in that day and a half, they really packed a lot in. And I would say there are probably 3 different sessions that really stood out to me to talk about here in terms of some of the things that I heard that
Yeah, you're
that I
bringing me to
liked.
my next question. I was going to say, with all that stuff going on, what are the ones that really stood out to you?
Yeah. So I think, like I said, there was 3 sessions that really stood out to me. I'm sure, and they were all really great sessions. So that's certainly not to discount the other sessions. There was a lot of really good content. But the opening keynote was actually a company talking about basically the hospital at home movement, which I think is really cool. This is a company called Medically Home, and they had some of the chief people there, some of the head people there talking about this whole program they put together. They're working with some of the largest health systems out there at implementing the hospital at home infrastructure. And it was really fascinating to learn about. I think it was really cool that they shared it with this audience. If you're not aware, hospital at home, it has been around for a little while, but because of COVID, its adoption has been significantly increased. And basically the concept here is that not everything needs to be treated in a hospital. Not every illness has to be treated in a hospital. Possible to create some of the hospital infrastructure in the patient's home, not only the DME side of it, medical equipment with a hospital bed, IV pole, and overbed table, and oxygen machine, and all that stuff. We've also got obviously the pharmaceutical side of it, delivering those IV medications right there from the bedside at the home. The home health component with nurses coming out, taking care of these patients. Telehealth is a big piece of that, telemonitoring of these patients. They essentially set them up like they're in the hospital. They have all the same monitoring that they would if they were in a hospital, all that stuff. And they partner with all these different companies. So this is what was really interesting was to at the end of it, one of the attendees asked a really good question. He said, how do we fit into this? We being the HME owners and decision makers in the room. And the guy paused a little bit before he answered. And he answered and said, well, yeah, you guys are definitely a big piece of it. There's the whole medical equipment side of it. Obviously, hospitals typically don't have that. And they're going to have to partner with providers. But I think that the real answer was in that pause, because here's the thing, and maybe providers don't realize this, but in a hospital at home type of engagement, the hospital is the payer from the HME company's perspective, not the insurance company. So this is a play where you have to have hospital partnerships, and you have to be their preferred provider. You have to be the provider they go to when they need to set up one of these hospital at home rooms, which means it's different than what we're used to, right? We're used to where you have all these insurance companies and they have these networks of providers, and the patient can pick any one of a dozen companies to get whatever they want. That's not the case here. In this case, the patient's been admitted to XYZ hospital. XYZ hospital has reviewed their case and decided that it would actually be better for them to receive treatment at home than it would in the hospital. They said no patient family has ever said, no, we don't want that. And there is screening, right? Because obviously not every home is suitable it's obvious.
Sure.
And there are certainly socioeconomic considerations there. That is this a program that proportionately benefits those in the middle and the upper class and not people in the lower class? Those are all things that they're trying to work through. But there are certainly some hard realities when it comes to being in a person's home, and like the level of cleanliness and is there mold, all these things that would maybe make a home not suitable for this. And that's a big part of the solution criteria is, is this a place, a suitable place to set this thing up? But let's say that is the case. They set them up. Now the hospital they're going to get paid just like the patient was in the hospital. That's one of the interesting things. They're billing the same DRGs, which is how hospitals bill. And now they have to take care of everything. So now they're going to call on the DME companies that they have contracted with for that area to go set up the equipment that they need. And they're going to be the ones paying the DME company. So that's the big aha moment here is as this program rolls out and as more and more hospitals get involved at hospital at home, it's important that DME providers have relationships with hospitals and be contracted with hospitals, where hospitals will in the future be a major payer.
Yeah, it works cut in California now, right?
Yeah.
They've been trying this and experimenting with it for as long as I've been in the industry, right? Like as long as I can
Yeah.
remember, they've been trying to get this sort of figured out. So,
That's exactly right. If you want to see this in action, look no further than Southern California and the way
I
that insurance billing, DME billing specifically works in Southern California.
I think that people do need to hear that though, because we have been exposed to it so long, Joey, and just going, yeah, that's not working, but it's going to work. It is working and it's happening,
And it's actually
right?
part of the much larger conversation that's going on right now about value-based care and value-based
Yep.
care arrangements. So hospital at home is an example of value-based care from the perspective of the hospital has assumed risk for this patient and for this patient's care. And now the hospital is responsible to deliver that. And they're not only going to work with DME companies, they're going to work with home nursing companies. They're going to work with Uber Eats. I've actually seen this where they have an integration with Uber Eats, because one of the things you have to provide to a patient in the hospital, as everybody knows, is 3 square meals a day. 3 square meals a day that meet certain nutrition requirements. Who's going to deliver that? It's going to come through Uber Eats to some local. They're going to have all this is coming together. So it's fascinating to see, but it's all about value-based care. And in value-based care, essentially, this is what happens. The hospital assumes the risk. And now the hospital has to figure out, because they're going to get basically the bundled payment. They're going to get some episodic payment for a heart attack or for a stroke. And it's up to them to take that payment and split it up among all the different people who need to be involved. The DME company, the home nursing company, the home infusion company, the Uber Eats driver, the laundry, all these people, right? They have to all these people, plus they have to keep a little bit for themselves, obviously. So that's really fascinating.
And in all of that, they've got to make sure the patient's being taken care of.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yes, that is kind
Absolutely.
of the end goal as well, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
They do.
It'll be a lot
That-
for the hospital.
But at the
That
same
is
time, it's
fascinating.
not like this whole any willing provider situation we're in now, where, the patient has all this choice. Like
Mhm.
hospital, I don't want Jones DME, I want Fred DME. It doesn't matter. We don't have a contract with Fred DME. You have to use
Mhm.
Jones DME. So it is a little different.
That is wild. And just imagining the infrastructure and the amount of automation and AI and stuff that has to go into running and setting up a system like that to keep it running smoothly and keep track of not just on-site patients, but off-site patients as well. That's going to be a huge undertaking as well.
Yeah. And we've seen behind the curtain of that a little bit. And you're right. It is. There's software. There's a lot of technology coming to bear here.
Mhm.
To really, because like the billing, let's say the hospital uses Epic. Well, billing is going to run through Epic, but Epic doesn't have modules to manage all these things I just talked about. So there's definitely a convergence of technology happening here as well.
So aside from the actual presentations and workshops, you're out on the floor, you're networking with people. What were the conversations about? What were some of the hot topics that were being discussed on the show floor that you picked up on?
Definitely a lot of talk of people just glad to be back in person. Obviously, one of the hottest topics even today is the CPAP recall. I think there was some news released right at the beginning of the summit about like another layer to the recall related to masks and magnets, the magnets in the masks, and they can't be too close to patients who have a pacemaker and other things. And so it's just like this whole ongoing saga of this PAP recall and supply chain shortages that have come from it. The supply chain has really been squeezed for providers, and they're all feeling it. Their costs have gone up. I think the name of the game right now is how do they reduce costs? How do they cut costs? That's certainly a major topic on the floor. I think that, a lot is you just kind of put your mind around the stuff that you're hearing in these sessions and talking about that as well. Another session that I went to that was really good was done by the Brath Group, and they are an M&A firm that it's healthcare specialty. They do a lot of work in the DME space. And they talked about trends that they're saying. They actually talked about 10-year trends of A activity in home care, they split it out into the different specialties of home care. So HME is one, but then like home health is another one, hospice is another one. And interestingly, growth area, it's all growth. So for one thing, home care is definitely considered a growth industry, right? The number of, like, when you look at the trend line of deals, it's headed up and to the right. So it's a positive slope. The number of deals per year is increasing. In other words, 2021 was a record year. And that was an interesting thing to learn as well. I think we knew it. It was like the perfect storm happened in 2021. There was a record number of deals and valuations were at a max. They're the highest they've ever been seen. They've actually come down since. So there was this window in 2021 to sell your company and get the most out of it you possibly could. And so I think a lot of the room was like, we missed the window, but we're in a growth industry, right? Find somewhere else where you can put your money and get a consistent return year over year that beats the market. But 2021 was a record year. That was one thing that we learned. We learned that overall, all of home care is on an upward trend. But when they break it down by specialty, here was this shocking thing. When they break it down by specialty, and the specialties are HME, home health and hospice, pharmacy services, healthcare staffing, and behavioral healthcare. Those were the 5 specialties they focused on. The only one with a negative trend, a negative slope, was HME.
Really?
Of all the industries, every one of the other industries over the last 10 years has an upward trend in the number of deals. HME is negative. But HME did have a record year in 2021. It's just that HME also had a record year in 2012 that actually exceeded 2021's. There was a giant year in 2012 for HME. And when you look at the trend line, it's like a wave. It's like a waveform. And when you force a trend line on that waveform, it's a low, the number of deals per year at HME is going down, not up. So that was interesting. We talked about why. One of the big drivers is the uncertainty in HME. And a lot of the uncertainty is being driven by competitive bidding. Because even today, nobody knows what's going to happen with competitive bidding. Me personally, I thought when they rolled out competitive bidding, however many years ago, that they would run several rounds, which they did. They would come up with a new fee schedule, which they did. And then they would take what's called inherent reasonableness, which is an authority that CMS has to set a new fee schedule. Like, it used to be that there was a fee schedule. They thought the fee schedule was too high. They ran all these competitive bidding rounds. Now they've got a new fee schedule, significantly lower. So low, in fact, that when they ran the last round of bidding, the prices went up. And because they didn't save any money, CMS scrapped that round, right? We all know about that. So that was shocking that's happened. Meanwhile, we're having just these crazy supply chain issues. So many feel that this new post-competitive bidding fee schedule that we've arrived at is far too low, especially given the supply chain issues, which is why the prices went up. But anyways, CMS hit pause on the program. Who knows what's going to happen with it? It hasn't been decided. Are they going to bid again? Are there going to be another round? It hasn't even been announced what's going to happen next. So that's a big thing driving the uncertainty in HME, among a few other things. But I think the other thing that I really learned in this session that was fascinating is that the growth area, and Rachel, you think you'll appreciate this, the growth area is behavioral health by a long shot, by a huge long shot.
And what I see coming out of that, I'm just going to go ahead and say it because everybody knows I'm crazy, right, Joey? It's going to leave behavioral health and it's going to go back to the original behavioral health, which is holistic mental health care, spiritual health.
There's a crisis of mental health right now in the US. I think we've all heard of that.
Sure.
When you look at behavioral health, it breaks down into brain injury, at-risk youth, autism, substance use disorder, and mental health. And mental health is like the biggest piece of that. Substance disorder is the second largest piece of that.
It's because when we look at mortality in the United States, the things that kill us the most, high blood pressure, heart disease, that all starts in the mind, right? So I think the approach, Joey, is if we attack it at the root, the mental health, then our blood pressure isn't high. And then we don't have all of these problems. So that's going to be a big thing to keep an eye on. You're right.
Yeah.
And I think regardless of how the stuff happen. Mental health in general has just become such a hot topic because, like we said, there's been 2 years of COVID, and that's basically been like a collective psychological assault on all of us.
On the world.
Everything has
Yeah.
been thrown into constant
On the
flux.
world.
Everything is changing. Everything is on the table, and the way business is done is forever changed. The way people earn money is forever changed. The way we approach getting sick is forever changed because we went through a collective panic. All of a sudden, it was a reality check for people. And I think it's interesting as the coupling of stuff like that with the rapid growth of AI and consolidation of technology and being able to do just about any medical procedure in the right home environment anymore, and so many procedures that can be done in home, like you said, and allow people to have the comfort of being in their own space. Because I don't think I've ever heard anyone say they enjoyed their hospital stay.
Within behavioral health, the top two areas for growth right now are, number two is autism. So autism is on the rise in a major way. And number one is substance abuse disorder. So substance use disorder has gone up just tremendously. And within that, when they break in substance use disorder, the growth areas are, the number two is mid-range residences. You've probably heard of the high-end residences in like Beverly Hills where the stars get checked in for a couple weeks. That's on the,
and then there's where I worked, right?
Nobody can afford that because those things cost sometimes 40, 50, 60,000 a week or something, right? It's just insane how much it is, or maybe it's a month. But a mid-range residences is number two. But number one, and this is relevant to our audience, is medically assisted therapy or medication assisted therapy. I'm sorry, it's medication assisted therapy. So they've proven, this is one of the things he talked about. So somebody checks into rehab, their chance of relapse is super high. I don't know the number. It's really high. It's something like 75%. Like it's a giant number. They just spend however many thousands of dollars to be in this rehab for a few weeks. They get back out, they relapse. But there are certain medication therapies that people can be put on that have a significantly lower chance of relapse. So that's where the spending is going. That's where the money is going. So that was fascinating in terms of that Bradford presentation. So not only is the HME the only piece of home care with a negative slope with the number of deals per year going down, and that's driven by that uncertainty, but that within home care, behavioral health is on the rise in a major, major way. And the last insight from that presentation was healthcare staffing companies have just seen an explosion this year. This year specifically. Last year, they had a good year, but this year, healthcare staffing companies, the number of deals is through the roof. And that's because there's these giant shortages of nurses throughout the healthcare system. Like people are struggling to so many nurses quit post-COVID that there's a giant shortage of nurses, essentially. And so healthcare is not only figuring out how do we get more nurses in the system, but also how do we subdivide the work a little bit? Because one of the companies I talked to, a staffing company, they bring their certified nurses in Africa. They bring them to the US. They can't be a certified RN, but they can be like the one step below that. I don't remember what it was called. It's like a nurse's assistant or something like that. But the nurse's assistant can do 80% of what the nurse can do, essentially, legally. So they're bringing in these folks from essentially other countries to take on some of this work, essentially, so that now even within the nursing world, the work is being subdivided. So that was all fascinating. The last presentation I would recommend people look at if they can is every year VGM puts out a financial benchmarking survey. It's called the HME News VGM Group Financial Benchmarking Survey. It's done by Mark Higley. It's a big, long thing. You definitely want to read through it. He kind of simplifies, I don't know if he simplifies it, but he helps you understand where all these numbers come from. When people say HME is a however big industry and that there's this many suppliers, where do those numbers come from and how are they calculated? It also has a whole survey component where every year they do a big survey and they publish the results of that survey. And it's everything, what's your DSO, to how are you staffed? How many people do you have in these different departments? How do you pay your salespeople? That kind of stuff comes up. How are your margins? What product lines are you going into? What product lines are you leaving? Certainly, if you're a VGM member, I'd recommend that you reach out to Mark Higley and get a copy of that report.
Awesome. Wow. Sounds like quite the event. Thank you for sharing your experience with us, Joey. I know you got to run, but if anyone has any questions, where can they find you, follow you, all that good stuff?
Sure. Please send me a message to my email, joeyg@prochant.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you again, Joey. Rachel, another fine episode. I am really excited as we're picking these up. Thank you, everyone who has liked, commented, subscribed. Please rate us on Apple Podcasts if you get a minute. It will really help us grow the show. And if you find something useful, be sure to share it with your colleagues or friends. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you on the next episode. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Modern Healthcare Back Office, a presentation of Prochant, a wholly owned revenue cycle management service dedicated to serving HME, pharmacy, infusion, and other healthcare providers. Learn more about us at prochant.com.